good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are. Today we have a very important topic, and I think there are a lot of detail about charting new horizons. And we have very special guest today, Mark. Mark is primary principal in M&A and part of Deloitte Consulting. So today what we are going to do is I will take some time to explain about this topic, why it is so important. So primarily, if you look at this topic is charting new horizon, and there is a detailed, a report which I have personally gone through. It's very interesting, pre-COVID and post-COVID, what is changing and how it is changing, what is dynamics of this entire, M&A landscape. So let me first introduce my guest, Mark. Mark, I would like you to also introduce to the audience so that everybody know you.
Dharmendra, thank you very much. Yeah, happy Friday, and really appreciate the opportunity to join you and your listeners to provide some insights into our research initiative called Charting New Horizons. So I'm a partner with Deloitte in our M&A practice. I lead strategy and transformation for our entire US practice and co-lead it globally with a colleague of mine, Sriram Prakash out of the UK, who is a co-collaborator with me on Charting New Horizons.
Okay, so what I have done, Mark, that entire topic, I just broke it because I know it's very lengthy and there are a lot of detail. So what I did, I just broke the point, 3 different pointers. And first pointer is more on retrospective. We wanted to see that, if you look at financial crisis, what we had in 2008, it took almost more than 5 years for the M&A activity to completely recover. However, it is very different this time around when the COVID pandemic hit really bad. So my question is more towards how different were the market condition from the past situation, and how did this condition led to a wave of M&A activity over the past 18 months since pandemic had almost over now. We are considering that situation have improved. So if you can give some detail about your study, what you have done, and I have seen the report. There are lots of points, but surely would like to hear from you for our audience.
No, it's great. Thank you. Let me set some context for how we initiated the study in the first place. We actually started it prior to the pandemic, and we were starting to notice a set of changes going on in the mergers and acquisitions landscape over the course of the prior 18 months. And we started to get very curious because we saw a lot of alternative deal types happening, alliances, partnerships, ecosystems like that, in addition to traditional M&A, which is more asset swaps, buy side, sell side. And then the pandemic hit, and it gave us an opportunity to redirect our efforts around what was intending to happen potentially during the pandemic and what might be the M&A response options. But one of the first things that we did was look at other market contagion effects. As you suggested, 2008, we went back to 2001, 1997, 1992, 1987 to take a look at what were the similarities and potential differences. And a few things emerged. The first was that the prior contagions were largely financially centered, financially driven. And as a result, people looked at the market dynamics and their resultant ability to take action upon that through the lens of finance. And it hit the industries fairly symmetrical, right? So you had some pretty good symmetry going on with what was the cause of the market contagion, how the market was reacting, and then therefore what might be the M&A response options. The pandemic was very different because it hit us geographically at a sector level, company level, and even us individually very asymmetrically, right? So you had every single sector impacted differently. Financial services was impacted differently from travel and transportation, to tech, consumer, and things of that nature. So Deloitte at the time came out with a pandemic set of insights around a recovery cycle called Respond, Recover, Thrive. And it was sort of a 3-horizon recovery cycle. And when we started to apply that to how the pandemic was impacting each sector, it was very different, right? The impacts of the pandemic on financial services and other related sectors, parts of healthcare, parts of life sciences, were much more muted versus those against transportation and travel and parts of entertainment, certainly oil and gas, things of that nature, private equity. So we saw the sectors starting to accelerate through the velocity of the recovery at very, very different cycles, right? So that was one big indicator. So we saw a lot of asymmetry there. The second was when we looked back at 2008 in particular, organizations' ability to act upon it were largely driven through the financial lens. And when we talked to clients, many of them felt they were in a much better position to act upon the market conditions if they looked outside of just finance. For example, what was their market position? What was their competitive position? How agile was their organization's ability to take action on it? To what degree had they accelerated investment in digital? Things of that nature, right? So how were they positioned to take action? So when we looked at that and we came up with a very interesting X and Y axis, which was basically to what degree is the market impacting us from mild to severe, and then how does that frame our ability to act upon that? We came up with this notion of offensive and defensive options. And when we started to apply that at a sector level, we saw some very, very interesting M&A response options beginning to happen. So for example, certain sectors like travel and transportation, which were hit significant, they were in the upper left quadrant, which was basically, I need to salvage value. I need to do some things to stay alive and be relevant in the current market and give me a positioning to go and do something else. So for example, you saw the transportation companies, the airlines in particular, monetizing their loyalty programs for tens of billions of dollars that you never would have seen prior to the pandemic, just to remain active in the market. Right, bottom left was, we're going to safeguard what we do because the market isn't going to materially change, but we need to think differently about what we do in the market and some of the M&A response options to continue to make us relevant. On the offensive side, it was the opposite. The upper right was the market is changing, therefore we need to change. We saw a lot of core versus non-core portfolio moves happening, and then bottom right was changing the game, which is where a lot of private equity went. So the nature of your question is the M&A response options as a result of the pandemic were very, very different than the 2008 crisis, because you had a lot of symmetrical response. The pandemic caused a lot of asymmetrical response, and as a result, each sector went through that velocity cycle very, very differently, right? So you saw many sectors jumping into doing M&A very early on, and then you had other sectors, because they had to go through different stages of that recovery cycle, then they started to use M&A differently as they were going through the recovery. So when we started to take a look at M&A and what might be the available response options, we came to the conclusion that it can't be as simple as an asset swap, especially with the evidence that we saw prior to the pandemic of these alternative deal types, the alliances, partnerships, ecosystems, platforms, JVs. And we anticipated that there were going to be as much, if not more, of these alternative deal types. And that's how we came up with those 8 archetypes of different types of deals, right? And a lot of that stemmed from the portfolio repositioning. You saw the supply chains come down literally overnight. And when the defensible positioning that you thought you had was completely eroded, it opens up optionality. So when the supply chains go down and the course of the supply chain from the beginning is the sourcing and the supply and the manufacturing, and you were overweighted, let's say, to a particular geography, and that geography got significantly impacted by the pandemic, it now opens up, well, should I be there? If the answer is no, where do I go? Do I need to own it? Do I need to buy it? Is it easier for me to invest or partner? And it opens up a significant level of optionality that you didn't have when you weren't forced to think very, very differently. So those 8 archetypes came into being, and we've been tracking deals across those for the last 2.5 years. And whether we had a really good crystal ball or we just saw the evidence of it, the majority of the deals actually hit those 8 archetypes. And we've been watching the recovery cycle, not just merely through the lens of traditional asset swaps, but a lot of these alternative deal types. The other very interesting thing that happened was we had surmised that our companies would exist in one of those quadrants. And they actually existed in many of them, right? They would do defensive deals to give them optionality to go on the offense, and they would divest parts of their business to go reinvest in others, or they would do deals to create some resilience as a result of the pandemic that they didn't need to in the past. So the nature of the pandemic really forced us and enabled us to think differently. And then as a result, we needed a different set of M&A response options in order to take advantage of the market.
Yeah. So also, I just went through your very detailed report, and you talk about different, market segment across geography. So what are the geography particularly you thought that was badly hit, or people could not plan, like company could not do too many backups, alternate way of doing M&A, or they found some different way. So which are the country or maybe the type of market where you got such variation? Have you? I think I did not find in that report, or maybe it is there somewhere. But what are the market, and which are the countries where we had maximum, people could not plan?
It turns out to be segment specific or sector specific. Those that were, for example, sourcing from Asia, in particular China, that got hit very, very hard as a result of the pandemic. And the same with where you had traditional labor arbitrage overseas. And then just as a mere result of the pandemic shutting down, operations, it highlighted the fact that we're actually more disconnected than we are connected, and the fragility of what our connectivity was, because something like the pandemic overnight, it absolutely eroded supply chain, as I said. With those that were relying on outsourcing and call centers, and in those markets where it just shut down for periods of time, it created that dislocation. So it was more around the markets themselves, the geographies, as you noted, and then those sectors that were placing a heavy emphasis on whether that was the supply mechanism, manufacturing mechanism, the labor arbitrage components of it, right? And then once those markets started to rise up, then people could address some of that. I think the other thing too that we saw, we had many of our clients were not investing in remote working. So, literally overnight, they had to take what was very an in-office centric model and find sourcing for laptops and remote capabilities and things of that nature, which also stressed the environment, right? So you had all of these unintended consequences, not only of ways of working, but also then, well, how do you go find and source those when those mechanisms were also shutting down? Right. So it was very interesting to see not only the symmetrical cause and effect, but also the asymmetry that was resulting by it.
Also, if you could just highlight some of the few insight on M&A strategy that generally involved in the post-COVID era. Do share what learning you have gained through M&A web in 2021 last year.
Sure. There's a handful of things. As we started to continue to research and absorb what was going on, a number of themes continued to emerge, which morphed that original sort of 2x2 offensive defensive into what we share in the recent report. And when we consider the effects of the pandemic, and as people went through that recovery cycle, it was far less of a need to salvage value. Now we're back into a little bit of that with the recession characteristics that are happening, and in certain sectors were hit more as a result of sort of short term. So there might be some short term salvage value, but in most respects, what we saw was a significant amount of deal activity in enabling resiliency, so that something like the pandemic, right, now that we understood the potential detrimental impacts of it, right, it reframed our definition of what's defensible, what's our moat. And there's been a fair amount of M&A activity to create reinforcements around resiliency. And for example, you take what the airlines have done. The fundamental customer experience hasn't changed pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, but they had to add filtration systems, contactless payments, all those types of things. And a lot of those were done via some acquisitions and alliances and JVs, right? And that's sort of the resilience around that. So if something like that happens again, you're in a different position in order to take advantage of it. On the offensive side, we saw three things clearly emerge. The first was business models change was highly accelerating, right? The advancement of digitization, the advancement of ESG as an impact, the redefinition of cross-border trade and the impacts of different geographical associations that needed to happen clearly accelerated business model change. Some of the repatriation from overseas back to the US. For example, we're finding new sources, right? Go back to my example of an overweight to China, right? It allowed you to rethink to different geographies. So it really accelerated that notion of change. The second was the emergence or greater importance of emergence of ecosystems. And when the pandemic caused that significant dislocation as a result of supply chains going down and that connectivity going away, we saw new ecosystems needed to be formed, and they're still forming today. And that gives opportunities not only for different connectivity points to be created, but also companies to put themselves in the middle of being a convener of the ecosystem. And if you're a convener of the ecosystem, it not only enables you to sell your products and services to it, but it allows you to create the platforms and the connectivity. And then as a result, you are taking tolls. Your ability to create new fee-based income structures as a result and new trade pathways is very significant. We've seen a lot of companies creating these new ecosystems as a result of the dislocation that took place. The third are those that we are putting into the construct of changing the game. Prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of investment in cloud, in AI, for example, right? Those things that were a little bit more edge-based. Now we're seeing that in Web3 and quantum computing, right? And those investments that are looking at Horizons 2 and Horizons 3 and beyond as investments for the next 5, 10, 20 years in that effect. And a lot of industries are entering that. A lot of industries are taking advantage of it. But the market at this point is starting to recalibrate, right? So that's really what's interesting. And, we saw the evidence of market activity over the last 18 to 24 months. And now you see a little bit of that recalibration, which is very interesting.
Right. So I think now since we wanted to discuss more about what is present. So, I have some questions around that. Basically, what do you think that are the key headwinds that are influencing the M&A market currently? So that is my question number one. And then other will be, what are the major tailwind impacting the M&A activity in the present time? So we want to talk about now. So these are my key questions.
Sure. Yeah. So naturally you can go right to the financial implications of what are happening, right? You've got, the continued rise of capital costs. You've got especially though the Fed here in the US, you saw the 75 basis point increase again, this week in an attempt to try to cool the economy. One of the interesting things about, we haven't been in a recession for over 40 years, right? So there hasn't been a lot of more, recent data to identify cause and effect. But one of the interesting things here, and you go back to my comment about asymmetry, we're seeing a fair amount of that now, because you have the still availability of jobs, right? The market for unemployment is still down, but yet the prices are going up, wages are going up, and that's sort of an asymmetrical effect. So you have to consider those in the context of rising cost of capital, and what does that do to M&A? You still have valuations. Interesting that the stock market has gone down precipitously in the last few months. Valuations are still relatively high in that regard, again, which is an asymmetrical effect. So one of the interesting things that we proposed in our report, we went back 40 years and we looked at the impact of cost of capital and inflationary measures on M&A. And there's a lot of narrative out there to suggest that those two things are having a significant impact, or will have a significant impact. And when we went back and we looked at the data to understand whether there were any significant correlations, there really weren't. When you go back 40 years, right? We looked at the cycles, and we point that out pretty statistically in our analysis in the report. And you would have had a natural inclination to think that those factors would have a pretty good causal nature of the impact on M&A, and they haven't. And I think that's one of the things that we're looking at right now is, do the current market conditions specific to cost of capital and some of the inflation or recession, are those things driving the pullback in M&A? Or is it, no, we actually learned, right? To your point about 2008 and the elapsed time that it took for the M&A market to come back versus the much shortened time in the pandemic. We're thinking that there's a short-term recalibration going on, right? Rather than any form of causal nature of capital or inflationary mechanisms that's going to elongate another M&A cycle. Rather, it's this recalibration. And about 3 weeks ago, there was an article in a major financial publication which suggested that private equity is raising another $1 trillion worth of dry powder, right? That's a pretty good indicator that there's going to be additional deal activity on the other side of this, right? When that happens. And we think in certain sectors, that's going to, again, you go through that respond, recover, thrive, velocity recovery cycle. That's going to happen again. Right. But again, the cause of that is going to be a little different than the pandemic. You still have to consider that 2 years after the crisis, some sectors are still finding their way out of it, right? So, many supply chains have really not been reinvigorated, right? So you have this on top of that. And when you have that as a significant tailwind, but on the headwind, but on the tailwind side, there's still a lot of demand. There's in most sectors, there's a lot more demand than there is supply. And when that recalibration happens, especially relative to valuations, we think sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, that's going to recalibrate. And then there's going to be another wave of activity because the valuation asymmetry is going to get back into some level of normalization. I think the other thing too is that given what we just saw in the IPO markets, right, that's going to cause another level of recalibration. And rather than companies going public, they're going to need an outlet for different kinds of exit strategies. You're likely you're going to see more strategic to strategic. You're going to see private startup to strategic. right, that would have normally gone IPO. I think we're going to see a wave of adjacency roll-ups happening that private equity will take advantage of going forward. So these are some of the things that we point out in the white paper based on our research that's a little bit more forward-looking. But what did we learn from the pandemic, and how does that enable us to think a little bit differently? I think the additional aspect of these alternative deal types are also going to be consistently higher in alliances and partnerships and ecosystems as well, as a result of a lot of sector convergence and the reestablishment of supply chains.
Yeah. So, I think your report has lots of detail. In fact, when I looked at, all your graphs, detail, and for each we have, subscribed detail, why it is happening. And I think this is very useful for anyone who would like to read it. Now, since we talk about present, we would like to know about how you see the future. And my question is primarily, what type of trend we are seeing or evolving in the past 2 years that will shape the future of M&A in the coming year?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that we've been out talking with our clients as this recalibration is going on, and the ability to take a step back and consider, right? The frenzied activity of the last 2 years, it was, I have an inorganic need, let's go do something about it, right? So let's sell something, let's go buy something. I think there's a really great opportunity now to take a step back and go, where are we today? And based on that, what parts of our business model could benefit from an inorganic opportunity? And then rather than jumping straight into let's go do something about it, there's this big middle stage of M&A strategy that has largely been missing. And that is the effective translation from our corporate strategy, enterprise business unit strategy. What aspects of it could benefit from inorganic? And again, if you broaden the definition of M&A beyond just a traditional asset swap to include those alternative deal types, it opens up optionality. And when you open up optionality, you need to consider what might be the implications and opportunities. So the connectivity between I have a need to let's go finding something is framing the conditions under which and the appetite around it that allows us to go look at something. There's historically been an awful lot of churn in the market by organizations and by investment banks and things of that nature, where you go from I have a need, let's go find something, and then as a byproduct of that, you're actually framing your appetite and your M&A strategy. I think there's an opportunity now here with the recalibration and taking a step back and a breath, is being a bit more proactive, framing that M&A strategy, framing the conditions under which, and that appetite to then say, okay, how does that redefine optionality? We're actually doing more alliances, partnerships, work and conversations with clients now than ever before, because of that asymmetry, that's created that optionality as a result of the asymmetry. So I think, the forward look is now that the market is recalibrating, take some time around that appetite definition, reconsider what might be those boundary conditions, and then, be much more pinpointed in looking for options.
Right. So I think, what will be your key, message to, your customers when they go for future M&A? What should be the basic strategy, 2-3 points, which they should keep in mind while they are going for M&A?
Yeah, I think the first one is what I just described, right? How is your business strategy changing? And as a result, the design of your business, your operating model, the needs that you have. Because the other thing too, relative to that, is why are you going out and deciding that you want an inorganic or have an inorganic need, right? Is it, do I want to scale what we have? Do I need a set of adjacent products and services? Do I need to enter a new market? Do I need to go after a new target segment? Do I want to expand in a geography? Do I need to take on different distribution? Or do I need to shore up what we have in terms of capabilities, right? So determining those types of things at the primary, at your anchor point,
Right.
then frames those boundary conditions and then what you go do about it, right? And then that totally redefines the basket of options that you have to solve for those needs, right? So I think that's one. The second is redefining your notion of being a prepared acquirer, right? There are many sectors that have serial acquirers, and they've created good mechanisms by which to do that, right? To evaluate what we need, how we do it, and then work with bankers, consultants, whomever to go out and prosecute that and enable that. But there are many others who have historically not been acquirers, or they may have been episodic acquirers, and they don't have that internal M&A muscle. They don't have those capabilities. So now is a good time to look inward and evaluate your own capabilities relative to that, of being a prepared acquirer. I think the third is relative to that, and especially those that have been serial acquirers around one type or episodic. Most of our clients are not familiar enough that there really are 4 different types of deals. So for example, many people believe that you go out and you acquire or you merge and it's like for like, right? And the way that you consider the integration is around, well, what do you have versus what do you have, and let's go figure out how it comes together, right? That's only one of the deal types, right? There's another deal type, which is what we call a bolt-on, where you're just going to buy a business and you're going to run it separately. That's a very, very different type of deal, very different type of integration. There's another one we call a tuck-in, which is you're buying a capability, you're buying a business that you basically just fold into yours. That's a very different type of deal and result in integration. And then the fourth is something we call transformation, where you're bringing 2 organizations together to do something different in the marketplace, right? Then you have all of the alliances and the partnerships and everything else associated with that. So it's really understanding the totality of all of the different deal types, and then how do you be prepared as a potential acquirer to deal with all that? Many organizations have done one type of deal in that respect, or they're just getting into alliances and partnerships, and they're not quite sure how to approach it. Right now is a really good time to be prepared to go and take impact on that, given the recalibration.
Right. So I think this is very interesting insight, Mark. So I know your report have lots of this information, but I wanted to bring this aspect to our audience because this exercise is very helpful to prepare the future for M&A, prepare your own M&A deals, and you gave some of the pointers, which is really very helpful. And I know most of the company make mistakes in choosing the right target. All these points what you mentioned, those are a kind of pillar for any company to build a foundation. So once again, thank you for your time and giving this so much detail about your perspective of coming out from your report, which is Charting New Horizon 2.0. And we look forward to have another session soon. So thanks, audience, for listening. And if you have any question, you like to know any further report, you just let Mark, or you can write to me directly. We'll be happy to pass those reports to you. Once again, thanks, Mark, for your time. Have a lovely day.